Okay, Unit 21.2, this is going to be the United States versus Japan in the Second World War. Alright, so, should be a review. This slide should mostly be review. But back to the 1920s, the United States and Japan didn't really have the best relationship. The United States, Japan and the West didn't really have the best relationship. Alright, if you remember back to when we did the move to global war Japan, I related it to the movie Mean Girls, right? Japan wanted to be the popular girl. They finally got a seat at the cool kid table, and then they realized that the cool kids really didn't treat them very well. All right, and that's their time in the 1920s, moving into the early 1930s. An example of this claim would be the United States showing their racism in the Immigration Quota Acts in the 1920s, and saying that Japanese people were kind of a not wanted group in the United States. By the 1930s, after the Great Depression and the stock market crash in the Great Depression, Japan starts to expand out of necessity. They need those natural resources, so they go into China in the Manchurian crisis. And the rape of Nanking and subsequent events are things that the United States really did not want and did not kind of think were the proper things to do. So they really did label Japan as an aggressor nation in the 1930s. One of the big things here is the United States is not a part of the League of Nations, so they were able to act independently of the League of Nations. And if you remember back, the League of Nations doesn't really do a whole lot to Japan. They kind of smack them on the wrist a little bit, and Japan leaves before anything major happens. The United States didn't have to listen to that. So, dating all the way back to the beginnings of these conflicts, the United States is going to place embargoes on Japan. All right, an embargo is a ban on trade. Okay, so the United States, one of the biggest, traders in the world, is not going to trade with Japan. If you remember again back to Japan, Japan is dependent on trade. It's an island nation. So now, as we're progressing into the 1930s, the Japanese military has taken over the government, and it's expanding and going farther into places like China and Korea, and further into the Pacific Ocean and Southeast Asia. So it is expanding. They call themselves the Empire Under the Sun, right, or the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. Okay, this frightened the United States. This frightened a lot of countries in the world, but we're talking about the United States right now. The United States government and the population of the United States all felt that Japan was an aggressor and was an immoral nation. So as Japan gets worse, the embargoes get more severe. All right, and the United States is going to keep hitting Japan with different types of embargoes. All right. As a response to this, Japan is going to sign the Tripartite Pact in 1940 with Germany and Italy, which really solidifies the Second World War as a major world conflict, and also protects them against these United States embargoes, because an embargo at a certain point is an act of war, if you're talking about on a kind of national recognition. This is a map of the Japanese Empire up until 1942. Right, this is the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. As you can see, they are very aggressively expanding into the Pacific, into Southeast Asia. Obviously, we know into China. All right, this was scary. All right, this was not what was supposed to be going on in Asia. By 1940, the United States. This is huge. Okay. The United States is going to expand the oil embargo to include oil. All right, this is going to be the point of no return. This is going to be where Japan says, okay, we've got two options. Either we crumble because we cannot operate without oil being traded for our war effort, or we attack. All right, and that is really what is going to give the need for Japan to go and attack the United States at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Okay. Let me pause for 1 second. Okay, so just to give you guys a little view of what we're talking about here. United States, right here. Japan, right here. If you remember way back, and I'm going to ask a question on this in the puzzle, but the failure of the Washington Naval Conferences to be recertified over time, and the kind of crumbling of that disarmament attempt, forced the United States to set up what they called their Pacific Fleet in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So they took Hawaii, which is, pretty, it's in the Pacific, right? It's pretty close to Japan. And, all right, here we go. If we zoom in, we zoom in, we zoom in, we zoom in. All right, this right here, this perfect bay right here is Pearl Harbor. All right, and that's where they set up their naval base, where they anchored their Pacific fleet. So if Japan became aggressive towards the United States, they had a fleet in the Pacific Ocean to respond to that threat. Okay, so I'm going to pause again. Okay, so back to this. Japan and the United States were at negotiations for several months, and Japan took a very hard stance. You needed to stop these embargoes, especially the oil embargo, because that was really crippling the efforts that Japan was on. Cordell Hull told Franklin Delano Roosevelt that they should expect an attack from Japan at any time, in any place. The negotiations seemed to be getting better, and then suddenly, on December 7th, 1941, at 7:51 a.m., Japanese fighter planes launched a surprise attack against the United States at the naval base of Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. To the Japanese, this was known as Operation Z. 353 Japanese aircrafts took off with, there were fighters, bombers, torpedo planes, all attacking the vessels in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. It was a very, very, very defeating event for the United States. All right, this is one of the first times that the United States has been attacked on their home soil. I air quoted it because Hawaii wasn't really home soil yet, but it was about to be on home soil in a very, very long time. And the amount of damage that was done to the United States naval fleet, the Pacific Fleet at that time, was catastrophic. All right, out of the 8 battleships that were in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, 4 were sunk. Luckily, as we talk about World War II and technology and the role technology plays, the major aircraft carriers were not docked at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii on that day. Conspiracy theorists will have fun with that on why they weren't, but that's beyond this conversation for right now. But they did what they needed to do, and they really disabled the United States attempt at a quick counterattack. But on the other hand, it also wasn't the most catastrophic event because the last waves of the attack of Pearl Harbor were held back because the response time of the United States Navy to get their planes up in the air and launch the counterattack was so fast that Japan had to call back some of the final waves. And Admiral Yamamoto, who was the planner on Operation Z, has a very famous quote: "I fear all we have done is awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." So he kind of realized that maybe they poked a bear that they shouldn't have poked, and now that bear was awake and angry. Right? A lot of dead, a lot of destruction in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This is the memorial. I'll break this down in the second part of this video because I'm already getting a little bit long. But on December 8th, 1941, FDR, in a very famous speech, a day that will live in infamy speech, is going to ask Congress to declare war on the Empire of Japan, and they do exactly that, and not only on Japan, but they also target Germany in this. Germany knows what's to come, so they are actually going to declare war on the United States. So the United States is officially at World War II on December 8th, 1941. Whew.